Hidden in the depths of the mind is a secret tomb where knowledge, fear, mystery, and a macabre sense of enjoyment is held. Each corner is resplendent with its own curiosities, and each curiosity appeals to a different soul. You're listening to The Crypt of the Unknown, a podcast that discusses the realms of the horrific and the fantastic in print, games, or on the screen. And now, introducing you to the Guardians of the Crypt, your tour guides. Here are Webb and Stefan J.D. Welcome, weary travelers, to the Crypt of the Unknown, where we will dive into haunting, terrifying, and possibly just totally geeky things that hopefully you'll have as much entertainment with as we do. I am Webb, and joining me, my co-host for this inaugural episode and every episode going forward, Stefan.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing good today.
Just good, not like splendiferous, or not like good but with the gaping maw of hell closing in on you or something like that?
Yeah, there's usually the looming terror beyond, just right over there. I'm looking right at it. You just stay there.
Let me just point out eldritch abominations in my area. There's one over there, and there's one down by the corner. We just live with it.
Terrible nuclear fixtures that just pop up everywhere, exploding, killing people. But I'm doing good outside of those.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And we do want to make sure that everybody, knows what they're in for with this podcast, because, again, the inaugural episode. Stefan, why don't you, because you're the one who really had the genesis for this, so tell me, or tell everybody a little bit about yourself so they have a feeling for the things you enjoy, what they would expect, and what you kind of bring to the table with a podcast like this.
Sure. So I originally was part of a podcast for about 2 or 3 years, and decided to strike out kind of here with my good friend Webb and do something different. And basically what it is that I have a grand love for comic books. It's my mission to join the comic book industry here in the near future, hopefully. Everything else, everyone has a nerdy side to them, and there's certainly a lot of that out there. But my thing is usually superhero stuff, obviously, and horror. Horror, especially horror. So expect a lot of that from me. Today isn't specifically one of the horror things, but it is a comic book thing.
It very much is. And before we dive into that, what would you say was the thing that really drew you into horror? Like, what was the young Stefan's introduction to that world?
Oh, man, there's so many things. The biggest one, I would say, is just the sensation of feeling like you have no control over your body or senses when you're frightened. I think everyone can attest to that. Everyone knows that feeling. It's an amazing feeling. I don't know why I get a high off of it. But I think my first real introduction into horror was Child's Play and the Friday the 13th movies, which scared the ever-loving shit out of me. That's definitely where I drew it. Anything coming alive that shouldn't be alive is always a frightening and scary thing.
And what about the world of comics? What was the introduction for that, into that for you?
Oh, sure. So I basically learned how to read by having a comic book in my hand. That was why when I would do spelling bees every year at school, I would win, because I had been reading way before I probably was taught it in school. And my dad, what he would do is he had all his comic books from his childhood, and he would carry them around in this ugly 1970s orange and brown duffel bag. And he actually gave them to me, but before he did, he would read them to me on his bed at night. And I would just sit there and just be in awe. He would actually read the dialogue first and then flip the comic book around and show me the action. So I always had something to look forward to while he was reading it to me. And I don't know what it was. It just blew my mind, and it still does today. And, as you know, Webb, I also do a little bit of writing on the side here. So I think that's what led into that as well. So a culmination of things, but basically it's been with me my whole life.
For me, the introduction to horror started off with my mother being a huge fan of horror films. Her favorite movie was Rosemary's Baby. I think even when she got into the digital age, I think her password for her Wi-Fi was Rosemary's Baby.
It's just like, stuck with her. Though my father was very, very adamant that we shouldn't have been watching that shit, as he put it. He thought that was the kind of thing that would like mess with our heads and turn us into like bad people, and it was too violent and messed up. And I distinctly remember, like, with the movie Cujo, my mother was also a big Stephen King fan, loved Cujo. He would get so upset that we were watching it, and I remember him ranting about it one day. So, I had to leave the room while Mom was watching it. Like a couple of weeks later, I walk into the living room, and there's Dad, and there's this movie on. I was like, "What are you watching, Dad?" And I had to be like, 8 years old. And he's like, "Watching Die Hard. Come on, pull up a chair." Horror movies, completely unacceptable, but Bruce Willis mowing down terrorists and criminals, perfectly acceptable. No problem with that. But I didn't really appreciate horror more until later in life, because I didn't like being scared as a kid. But once I started focusing more on the writing aspect of things, because just like you mentioned as being a writer on the side, so am I, that was when I started to appreciate horror for what it does and what it can do when it's well written, how it can mirror society, but do it in a way that makes it a bit more digestible instead of like looking at it as straight up social commentary, which oftentimes it is, but it masks that social commentary in the realm of oftentimes the paranormal or the unnatural or just a circumstance that normally doesn't befall people. So it makes it digestible in a different way. And then for comics, I didn't get into comics till late, because I knew of comics, obviously, and knew about superheroes, all that stuff. But I didn't start buying comics until much later, probably maybe even around, it had to have been maybe around 2008. It was late. What drew me in was I'm a huge fan of Star Wars and the extended universe that they have. And oftentimes that extended universe carried itself into the realm of comics. And I wanted to, like, buy more of those, then realize trade paperbacks are a beautiful thing. And from there, I started collecting some DC ones, a few Marvel ones, really stocked up on a couple of big heroes, Batman, Green Arrow. But that was where my fascination with those really came into play, was looking at how this art form is so wonderfully unique, especially when care goes into the writing. You don't have the kind of campy style that you had in the 60s, which is totally understandable. I do enjoy camp as well, fully. But when the medium was taking itself seriously, not too seriously like some comics and writers do, but just seriously enough to lend some gravity to situations and you could really see how things play out. That was when I really started embracing what that art form could do, and why I feel like it needs to be discussed with the seriousness that it deserves, which is kind of a good segue here, because speaking of going from camp to serious, today we're going to be talking about something that really did do that in conjunction with a comic book. We're going to be talking about Batman 1989.
Yay.
I remember before we got into this conversation, you had asked me what my favorite Batman movie was.
Yes.
And I am happy to say that it is Batman 89. What about yours?
I am also happy to say that Batman 89 is my favorite movie in superheroes, and maybe of all time.
Wow, that is high praise.
Yes. It has been around with me since the beginning, and there's nothing. I actually do want to say one thing before we get into this. There is one little fun factoid about Rosemary's Baby, because you brought it up.
Ooh, boy, here we go.
The writer actually just wanted to write a story about abortion. During that time, having an abortion was like, you were mental, we might as well lock you up. So that was something you couldn't do. But if the lady was having the abortion of Satan, then she's definitely got to have that abortion. That was acceptable. So he changed that specifically, and that's how we got Rosemary's Baby. Sorry, I just wanted to get that little factoid in, because I think it's great.
It is great, and that's exactly, ties into the point that I made about how horror oftentimes is used to make points about society and do commentary, but doing it in a way that changes things into a more extreme realm in order to make it more palatable, so that it's not like as ham-fisted as it could be, as if somebody's going out there saying, abortion is a civil right that should be extended to everybody. But by painting it in this cloak of horror and fantasy, or the fantastical, makes it something that people can look at in a different way. And we see that in action satire, too. RoboCop is a perfect example of that.
It's a great example of somebody over the pond, a Dutch man, looking at what he thinks America is and what the American Jesus is. It's definitely an outsider looking in.
And in a way, that crime-filled city of Detroit that we see in RoboCop is not far removed from the situation that we're presented looking at Batman 89, where we're looking at a crime-filled Gotham City where the mob and the police are hand in hand, and that provides one of the biggest conflicts to start off this movie. But before we get into like the actual plot and whatnot, the background behind this movie and the build-up to it is just as fascinating as the film is to me.
I agree.
For starters, if people don't know this going into the film, it's interesting to note that when you first see the opening credits, the first name listed is Jack Nicholson. And there's a reason for that, largely because they wanted Nicholson for this film, and they did a number of things to try to get him in there, including offering the part of the Joker to Robin Williams, and then telling Jack, if you don't do this, we're just going to get Robin Williams to do it, in order to get Jack to do it.
Correct. And he also, at the end of production, had to fork over some of his own hard-earned cash that he'd made from previous movies to help push it towards and across the finish line. And not only did he do that, but he raked in 20% of the box office earnings based on the fact that he helped production get to the end. So he was already set up perfectly to make bank off of this just by putting in the little effort he required outside of his role with his money that he already had gotten being a Hollywood movie star.
According to several different sources that I've read, Jack loved being the Joker.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he ate this role up because it allowed him an opportunity that doesn't often happen. He could just go hog wild with this and chew up the scenery to the extent that you very rarely seldom see for an actor. So he fully embraced it, and it shows, because as we'll get into here, you could easily just have called this film The Joker and Batman, and it would have probably been better to put it that way because of how much the Joker is in this movie and how much of the screen time he has.
It's true, but it's not to its detriment. It's definitely to its power, because you do get to see a movie where it shows half of what's going on with the villain just as much as half of what's going on with the hero. And it does an incredible dynamic of eventually bringing them together in the end, and they both have the same problem, that they created each other.
Yeah, it really does tie in very effectively with that. And that's an interesting point to bring up. As most people are aware of, with the Batman mythos, Batman was born of the fact that his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne, were shot in an alley by just a person who was trying to rob them. And in the comics, that person is not the Joker, but in the movie, it turns out that it is a much younger version of him.
Correct. That kind of goes back to how this whole thing started, because nobody knew who was going to write it. Nobody knew who was going to direct it. Nobody knew who was going to produce it. But the producer, Peter Guber, had been trying to get it made for about 10 years. And the reason why nobody wanted to do it, and this is going back to what you said earlier, Webb, about the campy to seriousness, all they had to base off of was Adam West's performance as Batman on the Batman TV show. Sure enough, when they did finally get it accepted by Warner Brothers, who did eventually buy DC Comics, Detective Comics, they hooked up with Tim Burton, who had just done Beetlejuice, and he had Michael Keaton in it, and now he wanted Michael Keaton back to do Batman. And as you know, and as I know, nobody wanted Michael Keaton to be Batman.
No, they did not, because at that time, his catalog was things like Night Shift, Mr. Mom, mostly comedies. And Beetlejuice was obviously more of a complete screwball comedy with that typical Tim Burton kind of flair. Who would cast a comedic actor as Batman? It does not make a lot of sense at the time. It would be the equivalent of, like, if you were casting, I don't know, Steve Carell or Stephen Colbert as Batman. It would not make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I remember Michael Keaton saying that he was actually grateful that they shot this movie in England, because he didn't specifically get to hear all the news and all the backlash until way later after they'd already finished the movie, because all that backlash was only coming from people in America. Everywhere else, everyone was like, whatever, Batman.
But as we know today, Keaton is just as talented in a dramatic role as he is in a comedic role. He was perfect for this part, in my opinion. I know some people are still divisive about that because they look at Christopher Nolan as kind of like the gold standard of Batman movies and Christian Bale's performance. But Keaton gives a nuanced performance that is not over the top. It's very laid back and casual for the most part. But his Batman and his Bruce Wayne are both very well done. His Bruce is very charming and laid back, not the typical kind of billionaire. You can tell that his mind is elsewhere most of the time. And his Batman is serious and calculating. And I think that's one of the bigger parts of it. It's a very calculating Batman. He does want to solve what's going on with the Joker's crime spree, and specifically the murders that the Joker is performing. And he wants to solve that just as much as he wants to stop crime in general. He is a detective. And that is something that is often, what I feel, missed out on in later Batman portrayals, is that they focus on the martial arts an awful lot and like the superhero element, but they lose track of the fact that Batman is first and foremost a detective.
Right, correct. The opening to this movie actually kind of shows that not only is he a detective, but he's been working as Batman for a little while. He still is kind of this mystery, this legend. People don't specifically believe that there really is a Batman. And the only person who does, Alexander Knox, is treated like a joke by all of his colleagues. And at the opening of the movie, you do get the sense that people know of him because you're led to believe, almost as a twist, that what you're seeing of this family walking down this alley is Bruce Wayne and his dad, Thomas and Martha.
Mm-hmm.
It is not.
No.
It was a neat little trick they pulled on the audience back then.
When it comes to like that portrayal there, I mean, again, lead this to Tim Burton. I am not a huge fan of Tim Burton in general. I feel like he can sometimes fall into the category of being a one-trick pony in the sense of his style is too grounded in Tim Burton qualities to where it doesn't feel like he branches out enough to mix things up. It feels like he's just very good at doing this one thing. And there's only been a couple outliers, which, mind you, have been brilliant outliers. Ed Wood, for example. If you were to look at other Tim Burton movies and watch Ed Wood, you would not know it's a Tim Burton movie. Big Fish kind of falls in there too. But when it comes to, like, you know, you look at Batman, you look at Batman Returns, you look at something like Beetlejuice, later on in his career, Edward not too much later on, Edward Scissorhands, they all have that very typical gothic feel to them. But for Batman 89, it really works incredibly well. Like, he was the right director for this film to bring that kind of visual flair and feel that this movie needed.
Correct. He had a very unique way of drawing, which, if anyone doesn't know, Tim Burton was working for Disney doing art for such a long time, and then he created, short movies, which eventually landed him as a director of movies. I think his first short was Vincent, followed by Frankenweenie, but I could be wrong. And so him being attached just made total sense. First off, just because of his aesthetic, like you said, Webb, and his way of directing and creating the mood of dark characters, which is something that Batman is. So you're right. I mean, this it had to be Tim Burton. There was nobody else I could think. I don't know if you could think of anyone. I can't think of anyone else who could have done this at that time the way he did it effectively.
No, especially when you look at the big names in Hollywood at the time. Like, I mean, you had Martin Brest, who was coming off of Beverly Hills Cop, Richard Donner off of the Lethal Weapon movies, and none of those, I mean, Lethal Weapon is a dark movie, but Richard Donner was more known for action movies. I mean, he was the one who did Superman, and was famously taken off of Superman 2. So, I mean, that if you were looking at, like, comic book heroes, I mean, there's a source to go to. Like, look at what was done with Superman. Obviously, that is not the style that you want to use for Batman. I can't remember who wrote this or said this, but one could say, and this person did, that Gotham is representative of New York City at night, and Metropolis is representative of New York City during the day. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And considering this movie takes place largely at night, that's where Tim Burton and his flair comes in, where somebody like Donner with Superman, that's a more bright, vibrant movie, which does not sync up with Batman's character. Just the idea of watching Batman running around in a cape during the day, almost just seems nonsensical. Because I don't know if you feel this way, but when I picture Batman, instantly it's at night.
Yes, I agree. If he's doing anything during the day, he's doing it undercover as Bruce Wayne. A dark, shadowy figure is not dark and shadowy, just this dark, brooding, weird suit in the daylight. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It would just look awkward.
Exactly. So no, I don't really think there were a lot of people who were around that time. And even if they gave it to somebody like Spielberg, who can do dark movies. I mean, Spielberg was a horror director first and foremost with Jaws being the first big summer blockbuster. Spielberg often has too much of a heart, and you don't need that loving sense of heart in this movie. You need that sense of brooding and kind of despair. You need to have this film rooted in humanity's worst natures as opposed to their best ones.
Correct.
So yeah, Burton was great for that kind of a direction choice. Even if his familiarity with the comic books wasn't as great as it could have been, but wasn't necessarily his job so much as it was the writers, who did create a Gotham City here that very much would influence probably the definitive Batman take that I think a lot of people would say, Batman the Animated Series. And those two things go very hand in hand. The Gotham that we see here would become the Gotham that we would get used to in Batman the Animated Series, with that very dated kind of Art Deco style mixed with modern technology, to where it exists like a time out of place.
Yeah, it only works in that world. That is correct. But this one specifically in this movie, I know I think his name is Anton Lynch. I forget his name, but the artist who was the guy who created most of what you see in the background of this movie and the structures and basically helped create the world with Tim Burton. The line that they always used when he was working is to make it look like hell rose up out of the earth. And that's what this Gotham City is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a depiction almost of a dark hell. And it certainly looks that way, because when the movie opens up, it shows you the whole city. And that's going back to what you said about New York. It is on an island, so to say. It's not really connected to anything, except for by Bridgeway.
The setting of it obviously taking place in more of what would Zen a modern time. So for 89, it was, essentially set around that time period. We can see, for instance, for jobs that we see people in, we see typical newspapers, restaurants, all that stuff. So there's no doubt about it that it's taking place in a time period that we can relate to. But there's always that sense that things are a little bit off, that this city is not well. And you can tell that from the urban decay that you can see, obviously from the crime elements, because, again, very early on we were introduced to the fact that the police and the organized crime are working hand in hand together. Nothing about it seems right, and we get this, and this is just kind of creepy watching it now, because they're talking about wanting to hold this parade for celebration of the anniversary of Gotham, and they keep putting it off or fighting to put it off because of the crime problems that are going on. And we're recording this in the midst of the coronavirus, and all I can keep thinking of is no, don't hold the parade right now. There's people going to die.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea. Do not hold a parade during a pandemic.
or in this case,
gang war. Yeah.
Gang war. And then one of the other things, of course, that we have to bring up that really helps set this mood is the score from Danny Elfman.
The guy who was in Oingo Boingo and did also work on Beetlejuice. Funny, I don't know if people know this or ever put this together, but there's a show called Desperate Housewives.
Mm-hmm.
The theme song to that is actually a reconstructed version of the Beetlejuice theme song.
Yes, I do recognize that now that you point that out.
So he's definitely done some prolific things. He's definitely moved on to bigger, better things, but one of the things that I think he'll always be remembered for is definitely the score. And I know when Tim Burton was in the meeting with the Warner Brothers executives, he was sitting there, he was kind of playing a couple different tracks, and they weren't really impressed with him. And Tim Burton's like, play the march, play the theme. And he played the theme song, the opening theme song of this movie, and they're like, oh, okay, we see why you want to hire this guy now.
It is one of the more iconic themes, as much as going back to Superman and how John Williams' score for that movie, particularly the theme for Superman, is so iconic. This theme for Batman is just as iconic and representative of Bats.
Yeah, so iconic they even used it in the cartoon right afterwards in the animated series.
Yeah, and just like how the animated series had additional music performed by Shirley Walker, this movie, and this is divisive for some people because this is a love it or hate it thing because of how it doesn't quite fit in, but at the same time, it kind of totally fits in. Additional music was provided for Batman 89 by Prince.
Correct. And I have seen comments before of people saying, well, that's like putting Kanye West in a Batman soundtrack today. And I would not agree with that because Prince was such a unique artist, such a unique sound in the music industry that there's something alluring about his soundtrack on this movie, and I own it. Actually, it's like 10 feet from me. That it works because the Joker and what he does and the scenes they use it in, especially "Scandalous" is a credits song, beautiful song.
Mm-hmm.
They all gel for some reason, and I'm not sure what it is, but I think Prince he knew what he wanted to do and made it work for the movie somehow. He was just a musical genius in that way, and I've always said the Mozart of our time.
You being a huge Prince fan, obviously it holds more weight for you, but I would suggest even with, me being more, I don't want to say a casual Prince fan because I very much enjoy his work. When his music is being used alongside the Joker, it does make sense to me more so that this guy who has gone off the deep end and is just looking to create chaos and strife would totally play this upbeat, funky music that has nothing to do with the rest of how dire and depressed Gotham is. Obviously fits in with his MO more so than anything else. And the way he switches between Prince songs and these classical reconstructions of music when he's dancing with Vicky Vale and all that, it goes along with his entirely fractured personality.
Correct. There's something alluring about it. It's everything. It's everything about this movie that I don't want to say got right, but they just created this world that had so many different constructions put together. It was the music, it was the way it looks, even the interiors of the building, the feeling of how the general people act. Like in the opening scene, you get to see hookers, you get to see bums, you get to see gas coming out of every vent possible. Everything looks destroyed and awful. It was just a culmination of things, and then Tim Burton directing it with his subtle way of making dark things jump at you. It just made something pretty fascinating. And then you have Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson with two powerhouse performances from really great actors.
And I would also argue, too, that between the Joker and Prince, it gives this film enough of a sense of levity that keeps it from falling into being too dark, which I think is a criticism that can be levied against Batman Returns. I love that film still, but I think it ratcheted up the darkness a bit too much to where there is no joy to be found in that Gotham at all. But thanks to Joker, thanks to elements of the soundtrack, this film is still light enough to where you can have a laugh at it because the Joker wants you to be able to laugh. That's his thing. And it saves itself a little bit in all of that as opposed to just how completely dark Batman Returns is.
Correct. There is no villain in this movie wanting to drown children in the sewer.
To be fair, aside from it, there's not a lot of movies that have that as a recurring plot line of wanting to drown kids in the sewer.
That's true, and I think Batman Returns does predate it, the TV show. So, I don't know. There's something there.
Oh, my goodness. But anyway, let's dive into the plot of this movie, because a lot of it starts off, at least, with trying to understand that this Gotham is corrupt.
Well, we'll put it this way. It's corrupt, but there are people trying to fight to stop the corruption. But overall, it is run by the crime organizations, and they do not like each other, but they all fall under one guy named Boss Grissom.
Played, interestingly enough, by Jack Palance.
Yeah, good actor.
Yeah, and an interesting role for him to take, because when you look at Jack Palance's history, you would not necessarily end up seeing him in a comic book adaptation. But here he is, and he's got that very grizzled face. He's got the strong cheekbones. He looks like a powerful figure despite his age. Then there's his number one guy.
Yeah, Jack Nicholson's character, Napier.
Yep, and we very clearly see that Jack is... He might as well just be like Jack Torrance from The Shining put in here, because he had a troubled upbringing, not a very happy guy, but at the same time kind of happy in the sense of, like, he feels very empowered and he takes what he wants, including the wife of his boss, or the girlfriend, you could say.
I don't know if these gangsters would commit enough to marriage.
No.
I don't know. This is all what's going on behind the scenes when it opens up the movie, and like I mentioned earlier, we get the little twist that we just see this family. It's a mom, it's a dad, it's a little boy, and they're trying to figure out how to get somewhere in Gotham. And it gives us first impressions of the city. They're looking for a cab. None of them want to stop. The one that does stop, somebody else butts in and just gets into it without even saying anything, like a bunch of jerks. And they're like, okay, well, let's go try over here across the street. And on their way over there, one of the hookers tries to come on to the little boy. You're already getting the feeling that this isn't a place you want to be. And the dad, being with a little hubris, thinking that he knows everything, decides that they should cut through an alleyway. Probably not a good idea in Gotham City. And as soon as they get in there, one of the bums, one of the regulars of the alleyway, says, "Hey, mister, how about $1? Just $1. Don't speak English." But what it is they're setting up to rob them. And his friend is waiting around the corner. And they basically enclose in on the family, take out the dad with the gun, and rob him. And tell the kid and the lady not to scream or they'll shoot her in the face. And that's when we get introduced all the way up on the building top, a dark looming figure watching all of this going on.
And as we find out quickly, the criminals start having a little chat amongst themselves about, what happened to that other guy. Oh, you say he took a dive. It's like, I heard the bat got him. And so we get this whole trend of finding out, as we will through the first half of this movie, that there's a mythos going around, or like an urban legend, of this figure that takes down criminals and sucks their blood, like drains the blood out of them. That lends itself to, like what you were mentioning earlier, how this is early enough in Batman's career to where people know about him, but they only know about him as a legend. He has not been confirmed fully, anything like that. When we see these criminals just like straight up try to shoot Batman, and then we see him rise back up, it lends that whole kind of idea of creating this mystique around him that instills a sense of fear and concern in criminals of not knowing what this thing is. So that is something that Batman obviously was trying to meticulously craft, knowing what the image of fear can do, because obviously criminals are a superstitious, cowardly lot.
Yes, a very Batman famous line, and this is true. This is true for all criminals in real life as well, which I think is why it's such a great line.
Yeah, and even though it's not uttered here, we do get the sense of why he's trying to craft this, because that fear makes criminals doubt and wonder about what's going to happen to them, which hopefully would help stop these crimes from happening to begin with. Obviously, in this case, it doesn't. And we see Batman go into action with a combination of physical prowess and gadgets, which is exactly what we would expect from Batman.
Correct. And the very quick shot of him flicking open the Batarang and throwing it to catch the other goon's leg and dragging him and not saying a single word, and the guy's trying to claw away, you feel a sense of horror from these guys because they don't know what it was that just threw out its wings above them when they thought they were alone on a rooftop. And coming face to face with it, I'm sure even though we have lighting as viewers, it's probably darker in the night to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they just see this figure, and it speaks to them. And one of the first things he says is, "I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me." And he asks out of fear, "What are you?" And he says the famous line, "I'm Batman."
And nails it. It's such a great delivery of it, too.
It's amazing. But there is something cool in that not only does he leave him there after roughhousing up both of them, he literally jumps off the building, and the goon looks over and he's gone. He's vanished into the night.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like Dracula.
And not the first vanishing act that we would do, and we see how effective that's going to be later when he does that against Jack in the chemical plant, because it really messes with his head. We go from finding out about Batman to spending some time here with an interesting casting choice. It turns out it worked very well. I remember when watching this movie later on, I completely forgot that Robert Wuhl, who would also become famous for playing Arliss in the series Arliss. I look back, I was watching the movie again, it's like, shit, Arliss is in this movie. I forgot about that. A very unique casting decision that I would not have guessed would have been done. He plays a very good role here in the sense of being this kind of just smart-ass reporter who is trying to press the police for information because, you know, he wants to find out about this Batman. He thinks that the cops know more than what they're saying. They've got to have a file on this guy or something. And it's that investigative angle of things that he's working on here that draws the attention of Vicky Vale, played by Kim Basinger.
Correct. Vicky Vale and Kim Basinger. Kim Basinger, originally not part of the role at the beginning. It was Sean Young, who is famous mostly, I would say, from Blade Runner. And she apparently, I think in this one, she fell off a horse while she was doing some horse riding and broke her leg or something. So basically at the 11th hour, they called Kim Basinger and said, hey, could you do this? And she's like, sure. And then her first scene, I believe, was in the Batcave, but we'll get to that. But that's the sordid history there. And Sean Young would even try to come back later in Batman Returns as Catwoman, and nobody wanted to work with her.
No, that was, oh my god, apparently they had to, like, have security forcibly remove her from the set because she was, like, all gung-ho on getting into that performance, like, acting like a cat. Like, I think the only thing she didn't do was, like, scent mark the desk.
Yeah, you're right.
It's like, I admire dedication, but there's a thin line between dedicated and crazy. And I think she unfortunately crossed that line for Batman Returns trying to audition. But then, you know, obviously we got Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman in that movie, and that was fantastic. And that's one of the things you can say about both of these movies, and, you know, going back in Batman here, the first one. Casting was done very well, because Basinger is a great Vicky Vale. She definitely looks the part. She doesn't try to, like, you know, steal the show. But at the same time, she often shows that kind of a dedication of wanting to find out more about not only Batman, but of Bruce Wayne, to where even in the midst of Batman fighting against these criminals and trying to protect her, after, like, trying to grapple up to escape from them and everything, she's trying to take pictures of them, because she's still, first and foremost, a reporter trying to break the story.
Right. There's a very subtle thing that Tim Burton does with her and Alexander Knox, where they both believe that there could possibly be a Batman, and she has come to Gotham City specifically for that. And they mention her work a lot, that she's gone and done a bunch of dangerous things. She's been in war as a photojournalist. She's taken pictures of the dead, which is something that the Joker finds very fascinating later on. But she's been places, so coming to Gotham City wouldn't seem out of the normal in her eye to come into another dangerous situation, because it's just something that she does in her work already. The only thing I hate to say about that is when you see the pictures of it, you can't really tell specifically what it is. I've never ever been able to determine what's in that picture. It looks like a body lying somewhere dead, but I can't tell. So
yeah, real descriptive or really, like, unique photo work there, Vicky.
Yeah.
How did that get a Pulitzer? What the hell?
Yeah, but they are a good team together, and, you know, that's leads into them trying to go to Bruce Wayne's house when he throws a soiree for the rich, wealthy, and the police.
Yeah, and this works on multiple levels. This works so well, because not only do we get Wuhl and Basinger together, watching them interact, but we see them exploring the house, and we also get introduced to Michael Keaton roaming around as Bruce, not letting people know at first he's Bruce Wayne. But we see how just haphazard he is with things, intentionally so. And I love when he puts down a glass, like, right next to the craps table. And he's just setting down this glass, and Alfred has to come in and, like, pick it up and put it on the tray as soon as he puts it down. Which also, a lot of credit has to be given to the character of Alfred, who is really the heart of this movie.
Correct. He does definitely show that he does not want Bruce doing this. He thinks it's crazy, but he obviously wants to love him, and the only way he feels he can is by supporting him on his mission to be Batman.
And even Vicky says in a later portion of the film, he obviously loves you very much, referring to, or talking to Bruce, referring to Alfred. And that's not something that we hear an awful lot in a lot of the Batman mythos, is how much Alfred loves Bruce, but it's very clear that he does. Like, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I don't know if it's just Gao or
Go.
Go. Okay, so Michael Go as Alfred. As much as I love the performance from Zimbalist as Alfred in the animated series, Michael Go is the one who I always envision as Alfred because he's just so like grandfatherly and kindly. He is like always been Alfred in my mind, and it's just a great performance from here that lends, if there's any kind of a goodness to this movie, it lies within Alfred.
I agree. He's definitely the heart, like you said.
We get the introduction to Bruce as Vicky and Knox are looking at all these different suits of armor, wondering who the hell would have all these things, just for no particular reason. And Bruce walks in, yeah, that one's Japanese. How'd you know? I bought it in Japan.
Who are you? Oh, Bruce Wayne.
And, it's a great scene.
Yeah, I know people get down on the humor of that moment. He's just making fun of the statues, and he's saying, he must have been king of the Wicker people. He does look like king of the Wicker people, so
Yeah.
I mean, he's not wrong.
He's not.
This might be the only time in the movie where I would say maybe it ages itself a little bit, just a little dated, just because Alfred comes in and says, hey, the commissioner's taken off. And he didn't look like he was taking off just because he was tired. He looks like he was going to do something. And Bruce says, oh, okay, well, yeah, I better go check that out. So he takes off, and we get to see that behind the mirrors in this room of statues, that there are cameras watching them. And of course, those cameras were 1989 cameras. So that might be the only time in the movie I can think of where it specifically dates itself. But it does give the looming perspective that he is watching everything and everyone in his house and everything that's going on.
Right. It's that kind of super vigilance that you would expect from Batman being ultra prepared. It's just done with that one very subtle, like, pan back through the mirror to see it. So it doesn't have to be explicitly told how paranoid, I guess, is kind of a word for it. Or, with Batman, that difference between paranoia and being ultra prepared, very thin line. But it's done with just a subtle show, don't tell, which is exactly how directors are supposed to do things. Show, don't tell.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we do find out what's going on because Jack is being set up to go to a chemical plant to try to take away some of the files and things that he normally would link that business to the criminal empire. And so Jack is being set up to go there. Meanwhile, his boss has called the police to inform them of him, and specifically called for Lieutenant Eckhart, who is on the take from these guys, to be able to eliminate Jack. But the Commissioner Gordon, who is the only truly, I guess you could say, effective cop in this movie, who actually cares and gives a shit, finds out about all this on the back end, and is needing to rush to the chemical plant in order to stop this from going down, because he knows Eckhart's dirty. And that's another thing that's interesting about this world, is that you have people like Commissioner Gordon who know that he has dirty cops, but there's nothing he can do about it because of how powerful the crime syndicates are.
Right, and it's not... I think the difference, too, is that in this one, again, Tim Burton's subtlety, he didn't need to make Commissioner Gordon such a huge character and go into every single cop and you have to learn their names. That's something that happened in the Nolan movies. But in this one, he just lets you know right off the bat, this guy's dirty, Commissioner knows it, he has to go stop him just as much as Eckhart has to go and stop Jack Napier. So they're all after each other. And on top of that, that's when Bruce Wayne's in the Batcave, witnesses the conversation between one of the fellow officers and Commissioner Gordon, and he also suits up and has to rush over to the chemical plant. Access Chemicals drops right in and just gets to work.
Also should note, too, this film did do a bit of progressive casting, in that we have Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent, a traditionally white character who we get progressive casting here. Billy D. Williams, very much a black man, portraying a character that was predominantly portrayed as white beforehand, and then unfortunately got whitewashed again, back to white with Batman Forever. Continued to be white with Aaron Eckhart's portrayal of him in The Dark Knight. But I really wish that we could have seen a Billy D. Williams version of Two-Face. I think it would have been frickin' fantastic.
It would have been amazing. There's something about his performance in all of his movies that he's never let me down. So I wouldn't suspect he would in Batman either.
But unfortunately, Harvey doesn't play much of a role in this film. We do see a pretty great set piece here at Axis Chemicals. Stefan, why don't you talk about what happens when before and after Bats gets there?
All right, so yeah, Jack Napier and all of the gang members are cutting into the safe, which actually I'm not really sure why they need to cut in when, if it's Grissom's safe, they should be able to just know the code.
Good point.
But I guess they want to make it look like somebody robbed the place.
Yeah,
maybe.
That would actually make a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's a possibility, but still, they could have probably just cracked it and said the same thing.
Well, he did say, Jack did recommend that if they were going to do this, it should be an act of corporate sabotage. So
Correct.
that does make more sense why they would do that in terms of cracking the safe with actual cutting of it.
Right, and so they crack it open, and there is nothing in there. And Jack says, "We've been ratted out here, boys. Watch it." And immediately, the music picks up this beautiful tempo by Danny Elfman. And one of the cops pops out from behind one of the boilers, the chemical boilers, and says, "Freeze." And there immediately is a back and forth fight between the criminals and the cops, and everyone scatters. And there's a frantic running by Jack and his goon Bob, his best friend, as they take off and try to escape the facility before the cops can arrest them or take them out.
God bless Bob.
Yeah, what a great character. Also, behind the scenes, one of Jack Nicholson's greatest friends. So,
Aw.
yeah, so it's kind of cool. They actually are friends in life, and, you know, I respect the character of Bob. He was a good goon.
Bob was like the best goon.
He is. Nobody is gooned more than Bob is gooned in anything.
I'm not sure which is better, the high praise of his gooniness or the fact that you turned it into a verb.
I mean, what can you do?
Oh, my goodness.
So good.
But as it's going on, we get conflict arising now because Commissioner Gordon's arrived on the scene and is insistent that Napier be taken alive. Do not shoot him. Gordon wants this done the right way. He wants access to the mob. He knows that if he gets Napier, he can start to take down other figures. It's so important that they get him alive. Other cops do not follow this directive. There's still open gunfire going on. Jack is trying to escape as best he can, causing chaos by, if he has to slash open some chemical vats, he slashes them open. He does what he needs to do to try to get through this, and he's very deft at avoiding the cops, but there's one person he can't avoid.
Yes, that is the Batman, who has arrived on the scene and immediately takes out two guys and lets one hang by shooting a grapple gun into the side collar or shoulder of this man and just lets him hang about 20 feet off the ground. And that's when Commissioner Gordon finally is marching with the cops through the center of Axis Chemicals, looks up and sees Batman, and his first words are, "Oh my God." Because he can't believe what he's saying.
Right. Finally get confirmation by the authority figures that Batman does exist.
And I can only imagine living in that world, how it must have been kind of terrifying, but also like, wow, this is a real thing that you'd never believe. It's almost like if we saw Bigfoot. I can only imagine how people in that universe would feel actually seeing Batman for the first time.
And in this case, Batman is trying to get the jump on Jack, and almost completely succeeds in this, except for the fact that one of Jack's cronies is able to get Commissioner Gordon at gunpoint and just tells Batman, let go of Jack or the Commissioner gets it. Defining character moment for Batman. He has to respect Commissioner Gordon's life. He puts Jack back down and then completely vanishes just to mess with Jack's head.
He goes to reach for his gun, turns around, Batman's gone. He's like, well, now that he's gone, I guess I could take out Eckhart because he's the one who's trying to kill me right now. And he looks down, he sees Eckhart, tells him to think about the future, which is a conversation they had earlier in the movie. And he unloads on him. And sure enough, in the background, we see that Batman has returned.
that wouldn't happen until a couple of years later. What are you talking about?
Oh, sorry. Batman has reappeared.
That was the working title for the movie, Batman Reappears.
Yes, he's like Prince. He's just there, and then he's gone, and then he's back.
So obviously, things go awry here very quickly for Jack. as he starts to panic about, the fact that Batman has, I almost said Batman has returned, but the Bat is back, and he goes into panic mode. Well, since this is a defining moment for the movie, Stefan, you go into detail about what happens here.
Jack, I don't want to say he's a bad shot, but he definitely tries to quick draw and take a shot at Batman, who uses one of his arm gauntlets to deflect the shot. It bounces off the wall and goes right through Jack's cheeks and maybe across his smile. It's very unclear, but his face is damaged. And by the pain, he just starts to try to run away without looking and falls over the edge where Batman catches him right before he's about to fall into the green chemicals below. And there's a struggle where they are trying to hold on to one another, but they lose their grip, and Jack falls into the chemicals and is eaten up by them. And the commissioner says, "Hold it right there!" And Batman realizes he has to escape. He looks left. There's no exit there. He looks right. There's a cop coming towards him. So he decides to gas it up and throw a couple smoke pellets, shoots a grappling hook, and escapes out of the sky.
Obviously, the commissioner is upset about this because they needed Jack alive. And as it turns out, though, as people start to disperse, a bleached white hand starts to work its way out of the chemical vat. Twist here, everybody. Jack's not dead.
And we even get to see Batman standing near the Access chemical signs, and he's looking for Jack's body. He wants to confirm that he is indeed dead, and he can't find him.
Right. Again, owing back to Batman being a detective. Obviously, if you don't see the body, you want to try to make sure something's happened, or what has happened. And unfortunately, it goes beyond what Bat is able to do at the time. That's why he's surprised later. Well, not fully surprised, but at least has that kind of mental clarity of finding out that Napier's not dead. And that does put some of the puzzle pieces into place later for him. But as for now, obviously this did not go as intended, but the plot was stopped. And as far as everybody else is concerned, Jack is dead, and he has to go get some discount surgery.
Yes. I do want to point out one little fun factoid before we move on from Access Chemicals, and that is where, if people watch this movie and they see that scene where Jack is going up the stairs, he's trying to get away, and then he turns around and goes up some more stairs, and Batman is behind him, following him. They actually hired a ballerina dancer to tiptoe in the bat suit and make it look like he was hovering across when he was following Jack in that scene.
Wow.
That is not Michael Keaton. That is a ballerina man. He was basically saying, "Hold me closer." Tiny dancer.
I guess he was.
I don't know. But yeah, this is the big reveal for the Joker. He is getting surgery done clearly by a discount surgical man, Dr.
Nick.
Dr. Nick, who's in the worst place to do surgery. It just looks like everything is infected with something.
Yeah. Look at how your face turned out. You see tools I have to work with? This is best I can do. Bye, everybody.
I can't remember the guy's name in the movie either, but I do remember, hey, it's me, Dr. Nick. Hey, Dr. Nick. But yeah, he's not doing a good job as Jack commands him to give him the mirror. Jack learns that he now looks like a clown.
But it's the big face reveal that we get is a bit later on. Now, obviously, we have some scenes that take place in between about great character building here because this is introducing Bruce's backstory. So we have him trying to meet with Vicky Vale. They're romantically hooking up, discussing things. There's a funny dinner scene where they're at an excruciatingly long table trying to have a dinner conversation from at opposite ends. So we get all that lovely character building, the sweet moments, whatever. Let's get back to the Joker, because that's where the focus of the film really needs to be at the time. We eventually get the reveal when he goes back to see his boss and let him know what happened.
This has to be one of the greatest lead-ups to a villain in all of comic book movie history. You don't see the face, you see a silhouette as he comes out of the elevator. It's very dark, and Grissom tries to plays it off like, you're safe, I care about you. And Jack is not buying it. He says, you set me up over a woman.
Mm-hmm.
He's not happy. He says, you must be insane. For whatever reason, Grissom thinks he can get a good one on him, goes to pour a drink, and reaches for a gun, which is not a smart move.
No. Grissom cannot hide the fact that there's a gun there. Jack already knows it. And when he, tells him, like, yeah, come on, Jack, we can make a deal. And it's like, Jack is dead, my friend. I'm the Joker. And you get the full face reveal, and Jack just looks the part of it brilliantly. Like, absolutely just nails the physicality of it. And then just decides to shoot Grissom, like, 8 ways from Sunday, like, straightforward, behind the back, twist and shoot, over the shoulder, everything that he just wants to plug him full of bullets and have a great time doing it, and he does. He loves it. Even shooting people's funny with the Joker.
Yeah, he's definitely having a ball.
So he gets his revenge, and then whether or not he, this is part of his plan or not, he's able to take over for Grissom, kind of appoints himself as the head of things, and goes about systematically trying to take some people down and also, get back with Grissom's girlfriend. So Jack's got a lot on his plate that he has to do, and even as he'll say it later, so much to do in so little time. Because one of the first things that he tries to do is call a meeting between him and some of the other bosses, letting them know that, he's in charge now. And we see how eerily he's painted up, because now the makeup he has to put on is to make his face look normal, and it just looks even more unsettling with that grin on his face and normal human-esque kind of painted face on. He decides to confront one of the people who's calling him out on things with a joy buzzer that roasts the guy alive. It's a great scene. It is wonderfully comedically dark. Obviously, when you do something like that, you let people know you mean business when you fry a man alive. And then, of course, just to cap things off, after he lets everybody else go, he starts talking with the corpse and wondering, what should I do? I can kind of let him off the hook. Maybe I should go back after him? You think so? And then he decides to orchestrate some of the rest of them dying.
Right, because he knows that the power he has as the leader of the gang right now is very fragile, and he knows he has to take him out, and sure enough, he does. But the brilliance of this scene and Jack Nicholson chewing it up is like you said, just sitting there talking to a corpse. I mean, you get like 3 minutes of him just talking to a corpse. That's the Joker. There's no denying.
Straightening his tie as well.
Yeah. One of my favorite lines from this scene is when after he kills the guy, I think his name's Tony, because he doesn't want to go along with what the program is. One of the other henchmen, the crime lords, says, "You're crazy." Joker says, "Haven't you ever heard of the healing power of laughter?"
And then just like how in... And I wonder if they did this deliberately, because in Nolan's Dark Knight, Joker decides to kind of like prove his effectiveness by shoving a pencil through a person's eye. But in order to make a show of power here, Joker in broad daylight, in front of everyone, makes a huge power play and decides to kill one of the other crime bosses by going up to him in public with his, some other clowns that are around him who are soon to be gun-toting, and just initiates a full-on gang war by taking a sharpened quill pen and throwing it into the guy's neck. Very kind of more of like a bullseye, supervillain bullseye kind of a tactic that we'd see in like Daredevil. Throws it right through his neck, killing him and announcing that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. And then gunfire breaks out. Starts a full-on gang war in broad daylight, showing that he doesn't give a shit about anything else. He is going to put on a display of power to make it known what a force he is.
It's right in front of City Hall, too.
Not subtle.
There's no denying.
Not subtle at all.
There's no denying that he really doesn't care, and he's going to enforce his power in any way he can. And the brilliance of this scene at the end of it is that Bruce Wayne is there in broad daylight. Vicky Vale having followed him. They are both there. And Bruce does not give two flying craps that there are machine guns going off and people firing into the crowd. He is solely focused on the Joker because there's something about him that draws his attention. He recognizes that face. He knows it from somewhere. And he almost follows him into the car as they get in and drive away before the cops show up.
It's kind of weird that Vale doesn't notice completely that stalwartness. I guess to an extent she does, because she knows that something is very much off about Bruce. But we also get to find out, too, that with everything going on, there's other people who are, like, trying to... Or how do I want to put this? Joker is... He's got so much stuff on his plate, like we've already mentioned. He's concerned about like trying to get all this stuff with the mob straightened away, but he also becomes concerned because Batman is stealing his limelight, too. And that rubs him the wrong way. So he needs to find out more about this Batman. And the only way he knows how to do it is by having the reporters who are working on him, Knox and Vale, followed. And that leads to more conflict because as they're following Vale, it also leads to them following Bruce. And we get a lot of things happening along this kind of dynamic here. Almost a love triangle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely.
And at some point in time, in order to try to make his point... because he's not getting the attention he wants. Batman's taking it. Jack wants to go, or Joker at this point, wants to go to a museum. And he sets a couple things in motion here, where not only does he want to deface art, but he wants to call Vicky Vale there under the guise of Bruce having a meeting with her there. And Bruce finds out, through the back-end channel of things that... through a voice message that was left, and Alfred relays it to him, that, I'm going to be 10 minutes late for our meeting at the museum. And Bruce is immediately concerned because he didn't schedule a meeting at the museum. So he knows something is up here. And unfortunately, by the time Bruce gets there, a lot of things have already happened. Man, this museum scene, Stefan, if you want to talk about this, it's great.
It's shot for shot. Tim Burton he knew exactly what he was doing. Vicky Vale waiting for Joker for so long, she doesn't know it's Joker, obviously, but she's waiting and waiting and waiting, and she's just sitting at the table, and all of a sudden she gets a little package. This little package has a ventilator mask on it, a gas mask to protect her from the noxious gas that is released into the museum and kills all of the guests, the waiters, and the employees. So everyone is dead, except for Vicky. Everyone. Sure enough, the front doors get kicked open. Who do we see? We see the Joker gang and the Joker. And he says, Lawrence, music. And they put on a Prince song. And they start defacing art, which goes to show that, when people are trying to talk about the difference in the Jokers, whether it's Heath Ledger's or that other guy who shall not be named or Jack Nicholson's, they always try to paint who this Joker is. And sometimes they'll say that this was the artist Joker, which kind of falls in line with Prince even as being a part of the production. But he definitely tries to make the case for it when he shows Vicky that the girl that he used to be sleeping with under Grissom's girlfriend, that he has basically messed up her face. He's put a crap ton of acid on it, and it just looks deformed.
Yeah, it's a very creepy moment because she's speaking through a mask. That mask itself, like her voice just it sounds dead. Like very emotionless. It's like, you said you were going to let me watch you make the paintings. It's just creepy. It is very creepy the way she's speaking. And we later find out, according to Jack, that his poor art project decided to commit suicide. Obviously not able to cope with what Joker has been putting her through. That just kind of sits with you, what he's doing. What's also interesting, though, when they're going through the different paintings and whatnot, there's one of them that the Joker stops them from defacing. And it's actually a famous painting. Figure with Meat. It's based on Pope Innocent X. It's a gruesome figure placed between two bisected halves of a cow. It's obviously a very demented painting. So it's kind of funny that that's the one that's left over. And according to Wikipedia here, it says, Bacon appropriated the famous portrait with his subject enthroned and draped in satins and lace, originally with the Pope. His stare stern and full of authority. In Bacon's version, animal carcasses hang at the Pope's back, creating a raw and disturbing crucifixion-like composition. The Pope's hands, elegant and poised in Velazquez's version, for the original painting of the Pope, are rough-hewn and gripping the church's seat of authority and apparent terror. It's as if Bacon picked up a White House painting brush and brutally dragged it over the face. The fresh meat recalls the lavish arrangements of fruits, meats, and confections in 17th century vanities paintings, which usually carried subtle moralizing messages about the impermanence of life and the spiritual dangers of sensual pleasures. But Bacon weds the imagery of salvation, worldly decadence, power, and carnal sensuality, and he contrasts those things with his own far more palpable and existential view of damnation. So no wonder the Joker likes that painting so much.
It's good to see that he respects some art.
Well, yeah, art showing chaos and damnation and all that stuff. No wonder he enjoys it. As he says, I kind of like this one, Bob. Leave it.
If you guys go watch the movie and you see that painting, I will say it is actually a very amazing piece of work. I do love it.
Yeah, I mean, too bad he gassed everybody in the place who could, appreciate it. But, that's Joker for you.
Yeah. Except for maybe Vicky, who... I do want to mention one other thing. The girl that he was working on with the deformed face that's sitting there with them, he actually calls her a sketch, which is probably the worst thing he could have described her as after he ruined her.
Right.
He called her a sketch, just a sketch. So he's setting the scene. He's telling Vicky that all your artwork is crap. This is crap. That's crap. And then he starts to see her wartime photos where she took pictures of skulls and bodies. And he appreciates it. And he tells her, well, now you're going to work for me. Sorry. You're just going to take pictures of everything I do. And that's it. And she says, no, I'm not cool with that. What do you really want? And he says, I want my face on the $1 bill. But he gets to the point and he basically says, what I really want is Batman. And I need to know everything you know about Batman. Because again, like you said, Webb, it's taking over his light and he's not happy with that. And she says, I don't know anything about Batman. And he says, okay, well, how about a whiff of my Rosie? And he tries to shoot acid into her face as she's walking away. It's great.
Yep, and she definitely avoids it. And it's not long after that where, Batman finally arrives and is able to at least get Vicky out of the situation, because it's a very bad situation to be in. And chaos kind of ensues from here, and we're introduced to some very... I guess this is a big action set piece. Well, one of the big action set pieces. There's two. There's the climax at the parade and all that stuff. But Batman has his work cut out for him getting out of the situation.
This is where I think the comic book aspect of it actually comes into play, because as we've seen in the comic books, Batman does drop in through a ceiling window, crashes in, and that's totally a comic book cliche. So they are sticking to the fact that this is still a comic book movie. That's something Batman would do, and then again, he uses his gadget to get them out of the situation and shoots a double grappling hook that lets them fly to the front door. And there's this very subtle thing that I don't think a lot of people pick up on, is that he throws smoke grenades inside as they're leaving to stop them from following him and Vicky to the Batmobile.
Yes, and then we get the introduction of the Batmobile.
One of the greatest introductions.
Oh, yeah. It's great. Get to, go to the car. Which one? It's very evident what car it is.
Batman 89 Batmobile. Probably my favorite Batmobile. I don't know about you, Webb.
It's a fuck of a lot better than the fucking Tumbler.
Oh, God, yeah. Fuck the Tumbler. Yeah, I own the Lego version of this. Hot Wheels, you name it. Model, everything, toy, anything. I love this Batmobile. It's got to be the best.
The Tumbler is like my least favorite version of the Batmobile. Is it more realistic? Yeah, I guess it's more realistic, an all-terrain vehicle tank. But I don't want realism in my Batmobile. I just want a cool car. Like, I want to see the Batman equivalent of a James Bond vehicle. And that's exactly what this Batmobile is, with the shields, the remote control, the ability to drop bombs out of the wheels. I mean, it does so much stuff that's amazing. This is the car that I want to see, and it's the only way I envision the Batmobile.
I agree. It also does sharp turns, which is very useful, apparently, in this movie.
Very, considering what he had to go through.
Yeah. So them escaping in the Batmobile isn't specifically a luxury for them, because they soon find out that the Joker, not only do his goons have cars, but they are painted with the Joker logo on them, and they are purple and green, which is a very beautiful look for a gangster's car, or a villain's car, which I guess you could say that would be like a little goofy on the Adam West level, but in this movie it just doesn't feel that way. I don't know why. It
just totally works with the rest of the aesthetic. I mean, we did have even Jack as Jack when he's getting the orders from Grissom. He's in a purple suit, so like that purple is already pre-established even before the Joker. I think it kind of works because we see that color palette and we know it's something that Jack had a bit of a taste for, so it's not too far removed. We also find out, too, that escaping, even with the Batmobile, not as easy as Bruce had anticipated it to be.
Right. And they soon find out that, I'm guessing it's the 10 o'clock traffic, that they get stuck in with a tractor that is also moving debris on the road. And he decides to ditch the Batmobile and take off and try to get to the rooftops, which doesn't specifically work out because they end up getting cornered by the gang. Bruce, having gotten Vicky Vale to safety on the roof by using a grappling gun, then falling down to defeat them, probably try to get information out of them, but I'm not 100% sure.
He does what he needs to try to get Vicky out of safety, letting her, whatever you do, don't let go. And she just goes flying up. Bruce, he has his work cut out for him trying to fend off these guys, and that's also where Vicky starts taking pictures of him in mid-combat. Vicky isn't starstruck by the fact that all this is going on. She still knows her job as a reporter. These are pictures that she needs to take in order to prove her case. And it's fascinating the way that all of it is going forward. It really does solidify the fact that this character is not just a one-note damsel in distress. She actually cares about what her job is and is dedicated to doing it.
Right, and it strikes a very cool chord in the scene with all the flashes going off during the combat, because every time Batman punches or throws somebody, a flash goes off because she's taking pictures, like you said. Before this happens, though, they do try to unmask Batman, and my dad, growing up, would always laugh when Bob the Goon says, "Check his wallet." It's like, I don't think he has one, man. He does defeat them, and people always get down on this part because they say, it's combat unseen, more like the Nolan movies where you actually see him, full frontal using the Kai techniques or whatever they were called to take down goons. And I like the cut version more. I don't specifically always need to see Batman doing a full-on fight, unless it's against somebody that would actually be competition for him in a fight, which we do get to see when some goon who I guess was somewhere running towards the action just jumps over a back wall.
Just happened to be in the right place at the right time to confront Batman.
Yeah. And he's got dual swords, and Batman's work is cut out for him.
But he does display his prowess in self-defense and martial arts. He's able to deflect the blows, uses his gauntlets to his advantage, is able to defeat him, and not I could almost picture the way they set it up, like when he's doing the villains doing all these advanced maneuvers and showboating, and I could just picture Batman just Indiana Jones style, just throwing a batarang to the face. But nope, Bats takes this one head on and ultimately prevails, and in the end, is able to get back to the car with Vicky. And then they start driving off. We get a great extended sequence of showing just how much power the Batmobile has as cruising down these empty streets, or empty back roads, I guess you could say at that point in time, heading back to the Batcave. Mm-hmm. Because Bruce has two motivations for getting Vale back to the Batcave. One of them is that while all this was going on, Joker was poisoning the city in a way that they didn't know what was happening. There were just mysterious deaths that were happening that seemed to be allergic reactions to something. It's obviously put onto full display in a great commercial that Joker puts on. This guy here was using Brand X.
Yeah, that's a perfect encapsulation of what happens.
And meanwhile, the Joker products will put a smile back on your face, or a grin, I think he calls it. Come to find out, the entire city has been in turmoil trying to figure out where the poison is, what it's in. Bruce has already figured it out. It's actually not that it's any one chemical, but it's been divided up into a series of different products that, if they're applied at the same time or in conjunction with each other, could combine together to cause someone to die from this mixture of poisons. So it's less traceable that way. Brilliant move by the Joker. And we do find out that he is a chemist, or was a chemist, specialized in that before, turning into the life of crime. Bruce has put it all together, wants Vicky to have that information to bring it to the press so they can break the news. But while they're in the Batcave and Vicky's admiring all this, she just flat out asks him, "You could have, given this information to anybody. Why me?" And he says, "Because you have one more thing that I want." And then next scene we see her, she's on her bed, back in her apartment, passed out. And as she's coming to, she reaches for her chest where she had put the film and finds out the film is gone. So Batman was fully aware that she was taking pictures that entire time and did not want any of it.
Right. In comic book, because there was a comic book adaptation of this movie. It does go into detail what happens when he throws his cape up right before it goes to black and she's in her apartment. He does use a sleeping gas on her, which knocks her out. So there was a little bit of clarification in the comic book that the movie didn't give us, which, kind of cool.
But also, yeah, understandable why they wouldn't want to show, like, the hero gassing a woman into, like, sleepiness. There's some serious moral quandaries about that. Vicky's back at her apartment. She's, understands what happened, still reports it. Breaking news, Joker is still not happy about any of this, so obviously he has to up his game more, and he has to try to make another power play here. We actually get a rare scene, I guess you could say, through most Batman mediums, where we eventually lead to Joker trying to make a move on Vicky Vale, and doing it at a time where Bruce is trying to admit to her that he's Batman, which does not go very well for him trying to talk about it. He is just fumbling over himself like crazy. And in the middle of all that, who should appear at the door but Joker himself?
Yeah. I like when he's trying to explain it to her, though. He says, you know how somebody comes down and kisses someone goodbye and goes to work and does a job? It's just the worst explanation he could have gave her for, oh, I'm Batman, by the way. But she's like, no, I don't understand anything of what you're saying. When Joker comes in, Bruce automatically knows that he's going to die. There's no qualms about it. So I think what it is it's a steel vanity, like perfume tray is what it is.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and he puts it right over his heart because he knows that's where he's going to shoot. And they get into a little argument, Joker and Bruce. Bruce says one of the lines that people either like or hate of this movie. He says, it's time to get nuts. You want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts. I have no problem with it. I think it's clear that he's egging him on to shoot him because he needs to get the hell out of there and stop what they're going to do.
And then we get a unquestionably iconic delivery from Joker.
Yes. I think, what does he say? He says, never rub another man's rhubarb.
That's not quite the line I was going
kidding.
No, Stefan, no.
I know. I know
That's
what line
not the
you're
line.
looking for.
This reminded me of a Whose Line Is It Anyway episode where Colin and Ryan are talking. And Ryan says to Colin, what do you think of when I say the name Ricky Ricardo? And he's like, oh, tapioca. Like, why is that, Colin? Wasn't that one of his songs? Tapioca, tapioca. Ryan just starts laughing. It's like, no, Colin. That's not it. It's almost crying, laughing. This is what reminded me of. No, Stefan, that's not the line.
Are you sure? No, you could have swore that was his famous line in this movie.
No, that would have made it. That would have made the Prince song that quotes it far more memorable too.
I believe the line you're looking for is, "Have you ever danced with the devil by the pale moonlight?" And Bruce says, "What?" He says, "I just like to ask that of all my prey. I just like the sound of it." And then he shoots him in the heart. Of course,
yes,
deflected by the vanity tray.
Joker just wants to take his leave at that point in time. He's already made his statement. He's made it clear to Vicky what he's after, so he just prances on out of there, pretends to fart, and moves forward, blowing himself forward with the wind.
Is what he's quoting there? Is that the Raven? I can't remember if it's an Edgar Allan Poe thing, because he says, "Take thy beak from out thy heart," or something.
Pining for his love, so that would make sense if that was the case. So yeah, he makes this grand exit, but he still leaves a present behind for Vicky too, in the form of like a pop-up fist that's holding a bunch of dead flowers.
Is it supposed to be clear to you that she passes out from this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I that's what I got to.
Yeah, just the surprise and the shock of everything going on. The fact that Bruce has vanished after being apparently shot, and she sees like the bullet deflected by the steel plate. Like all that stuff is just too much for her to handle. She completely blacks out. But it's not the last we see of Vicky, obviously, and not the last that Bruce is going to see of her, because goddamn Alfred later on just decides to let Vicky into the Batcave.
Yes, he does. It's clear that, because fans are angry about this, so like, Alfred would never do that. It's clear that this Alfred is trying to get Bruce to go away from being Batman, and he does see Vicky as his bright light, and he knows it, and Bruce fights against it when they talk. You know, she asks him, why do you do this? And he says, I don't know why I do it. It's probably the greatest explanation for Batman, really. He says, I don't know why I do it. I just have to, because nobody else can. And I think people take that whole scene for granted, but that's definitely Batman in a nutshell.
I agree. It is a powerful scene for him, being confronted with both sides of his life. The fact that he's supposed to be a normal person, the fact that he's Batman, and having to come to terms with why he does it. And at this point in time, he doesn't really know. I mean, obviously, he can't avenge his parents. He knows that. But why does he keep doing it? And ultimately, it just boils down to it's because, like he said, he's the only one who can. And Alfred so desperately wants his basically a surrogate son to have some sense of normalcy in his life, which is why, he knew that Bruce was going to tell her anyway, or trying to, and this was his way of making that part even a bit easier for him. It does go well, but Bruce has things to do because the Joker is going to be launching his own parade because Gotham decided to cancel theirs. And he knows the Joker's going to try to pull some shit. Something's going to go down. And he has to be able to make his presence known there in order to stop this from happening.
Right. I think the line he says, which is really also pretty cool in that scene, he says, he's out there and I've got to go to work. You get this really amazing just shot of the Bat Chamber opening up to reveal the Bat outfit. And we see him kind of putting it on, and then all of a sudden, there he is standing in all his glory as Batman.
Eyes open up, get the iconic score in the background. Yeah, he does have work to do because Joker was planning to dump $20 million into the streets of Gotham in the middle of a parade, set to the song Trust by Prince, and he even asks them the audience, who do they trust? Ties in there as well. But I guess I read where in the scene where he's dumping out the money, there was a deleted scene that showed that it was all counterfeit currency.
Right.
The money was actually tying back to that great line about wanting his face on the $1 bill. It's just money with his face on it.
It's so great. It's unfortunate they didn't put that in the movie. They did in the comic book, but yeah, that's brilliant. It's brilliant that all tied together.
And so totally Joker, too. So totally Joker.
Yeah, the line that he says, because he finally, he's the Joker. He's got to have spectacle. And he wants to be seen right now, which the audience clearly loves him for throwing all the cash out there. And he does say, who do you trust? Hubba, 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 money, money, money. Who do you trust? Me, I'm giving away free money. And where is the Batman? And there's a long pause, and he says, at home, washing his tights. And that's when we get this great reveal, one of the best reveals ever. I actually own the 30-year-old actual 1989 model of the Batwing in this movie. I gotta tell you, a plastic web that's 30 years old, it's really hard to keep together.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Yes. We do get the reveal that Batman does own a Batwing. Probably one of the greatest reveals. The greatest Batwing, in my opinion, again. The Nolan one, I don't care how realistic it is. It sucks. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I do. I mean, is it ridiculous that Batman would build a plane in the shape of his own emblem on his chest? Totally ridiculous. Is it the only Batwing I want to see ever pictured? Yeah, it is. It's the only one I will accept.
That's good to hear.
But I do love it. And even Joker's like, why did you tell me he had one of those things?
Oh, yeah. He stole my balloons.
Because Joker, his ultimate plan was to lure people into the streets. And I don't know if this was influenced by Miller's version of The Dark Knight, where in the Joker chapter, he gasses a bunch of people at an amusement park. Very similar here. He's planning on gassing the entire crowd with his balloons to kill everybody there. And he kills a good number of people. This Joker's body count, between the people he shoots, the people at the museum, people in the streets, this guy's got a pretty heavy body count.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely in the hundreds at the end of this movie.
Because by the time Batman can get the plane around to try to take down the balloons, he's already gassed. That gas has been out there and killing hundreds of people. And there's something to be said about social commentary about this, too, to where Gotham City is so poor that people are willing to go out into the streets to get money from a madman who has already been, has said to have killed people with poisoning through the cosmetics. But people are still willing to go out there to get money because Gotham City has such a terrible problem, obviously, with crime and poverty. People are living out in the streets. What more do they have to live for? So Joker is playing up on that, knowing full well that he can victimize these people until Batman takes his balloons away.
Yeah, one of the most iconic shots of the Batwing going into the clouds and then eventually soaring up into the moon to give us that shot of what looks like the Bat emblem, but it's the moon and the Batwing together. My friends always ask, why does he do that? And my answer to it, in my mind's eye, is that he's letting the people of Gotham know that he's still there. And he's coming back. And he does come back.
That's actually a really good way of putting that. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and then we find out later he does need something to let them know he's there, a bat signal. So it's kind of like foreshadowing almost, in my mind.
That's a really good way of putting it there. Because, after he does do that, he swoops back down, is able to try to take down the Joker. What he was not planning on, however, was that Joker would have some form of an anti-aircraft gun just stowed away with a long-barreled revolver. A comically long-barreled revolver at that. And I guess Jack's shooting skills have improved because he takes down the Batwing in one shot.
I know it's supposed to be kind of just a joke. In the actual panels for the movie, it shows the Joker, flying 10 feet back after he pulls the trigger. So there was definitely comedy involved in the idea of that.
But at the same time, talk about Batman being crazy prepared, but Joker having the access to an anti-artillery round, basically, or like an anti-aircraft round. Yeah, what the hell? Let's go with it. I'm willing to work with it.
Yeah, how else is he going to get that damn thing down? Really.
But it should also be noted, too, that Batman's rampage of going back against Joker actually started before going to the Batwing. He did take down a base of operations by driving the fucking Batmobile into a building, dropping bombs in it, and just driving right the fuck back out.
Right. Joker is using Access chemicals to create all the toxin to poison the city.
Right, and Bruce wants to make sure that's taken down. And this Batman apparently has very few qualms about killing people, because he just drops some bombs in there, there's people everywhere, drives the fuck out. I imagine dozens of people were working in there, dead.
That's the thing, too. My explanation of it is that we do know that Tim Burton did read one comic book, and that was The Killing Joke. And at the end of The Killing Joke, even though he didn't write it that way, people have thought, well, Batman kills the Joker at the end of it.
I never read it that way.
Yeah, it was never his intention. I've never read it that way, but it's been a great debate among fans. He's clarified that he never meant to write it that way. I think because Tim Burton, that's the only comic he read, he thought maybe the same thing, that Batman has no qualms with killing people.
Either way, he blows up the factory, and then that's when he gets back to the Batwing to take down the balloons and everything. But after the Batwing has crashed, now he just has to try to go after the Joker, just on foot for the most part. And the Joker and this is where, some people have criticized this last part because it was kind of, they didn't entirely know what they were doing at the time in the film. There's been talk that this was forced in, but the final set piece ends at the cathedral as they're trying to ascend it to, I guess Joker's just trying to get away. And he does call for a helicopter lift. He needs a helicopter here in about 5 minutes. Then he's looking around. Actually, make it 10. And to the film's credit, the helicopter shows up 10 minutes later.
It does. I think the contention for why this scene feels like people feel the way they do is because originally Robin was supposed to show up in this scene. I forget specifically what it was for, but it was some interaction with Batman and the Joker. So there was no cathedral scene specifically, but we did get one, and that 10-minute deadline is pretty rad.
We see, Joker just trying to go after Vicky, trying to live it up. Meanwhile, Batman's just playing catch-up, and unfortunately he has to deal with numerous thugs that are, just here in the chapel waiting to mess with him.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, at least, tries to jump Batman, fails miserably by falling through the old wooden floor of the cathedral, which is great.
It is.
But then we have another one who gives Batman a run for his money and messes him up.
We have to remember that he just was in a plane accident. I mean,
It's true.
And then he did climb like 300 stories to the top of this cathedral. He's not in the best shape right now to do combat.
No, clearly not. Eventually, Bruce does get the better of him by pretending to fall down the hole that's where the bell was like plunging through the floors. He manages to basically flip up, grab this guy by his legs, run his head into the bell, or whatever is left there. I think it's the bell.
Yeah.
And then throws him down, just plummeting stories upon stories to his obvious death. So a clear kill by Batman.
Yes, another clear kill.
The bell is still there at that point in time. The bell will fall after the Joker sprays some acid on it to wear down the cables and cause it to plummet, which is also cutting off any kind of backup that Batman could have from the police, and it's a very smart move.
It is.
And then we get the epic finale of Batman and Joker just fighting it out at the top of this cathedral here.
Something we forgot to mention, which they came to this conclusion, is that earlier when Joker was telling the city that he was going to throw the $20 million onto it, Batman had paused the screen. He reminisced about his parents' death, who killed them, and then he remembered that face and the face on the screen and put two and two together that the Joker had killed his parents.
Right, and a great flashback scene we get from that too, which is not overdone. It is the definitive scene. They've recreated it so many times needlessly for other films.
Right.
But here it's just straight up, we see what happens. We see a very strong casting for a young Jack Nicholson, like scarily good whoever they cast.
Yeah, this is all brilliant.
Yeah, and that's just that iconic line, "You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight?" And just that the look on his face with that sheer joy that he has, which so easily translates to what he would become. It's a great flashback.
It really is. That's the first thing Batman asks him before he punches him in the face, and then Joker goes running into the bell tower and then bounces back into Batman's fist again. Something I always told my dad when he would piss me off is I would quote this line in the movie, to remind him that, you idiot, you made me, remember? You dropped me into that vat of chemicals. That wasn't easy to get over, and don't think that I didn't try.
Try.
Of course, everyone knows what I mean by that. Intercourse, but
yes,
but that is always been one of my favorite lines of the movie. This is where they show down and they finally reveal, I made you, but you made me first, because that's the duality that they have in this universe, the Tim Burton.
As the helicopter arrives, Batman generally has the upper hand here, between him being, injured from the crash, having to look after Vicky. Like there's so many things as Vicky tries to distract Joker. Stuff, you're so purple. But between all those, unfortunately, Joker is able to one-up Batman and has them basically flips him around to where he is clinging to the side of the cathedral, him and Vicky. And Joker is getting ready to take off as the helicopter is approaching, and he's like kicking down different bricks just to like taunt Batman as he leaves him hanging there and taunting him. As he prepares to get onto the helicopter, which is lowered the rope ladder, Batman has one final chance to get him. As he's hanging from there, he uses a grapple to connect Joker's leg to a stone gargoyle that's up on top of the cathedral. And as the helicopter's trying to lift off, obviously Joker's tethered. He doesn't want to let go of the rope ladder because he's trying to escape, but the force of the helicopter lifting up causes this old gargoyle to start to break free from where it was positioned, and we have this terrifying moment for Joker where he's hanging onto the ladder with the weight of this gargoyle pulling down on him. Joker's not holding onto this ladder by anything but his hands at this point in time. His feet are not sufficiently planted onto it. You have the villain in this very precarious situation where all he can do is try to hold on and support the weight of this like heavy stone gargoyle weighing him down. One hand slips because he can't support the weight, and the other hand's going to happen, and he knows he's going to die. He just knows it. He can't hold on. Terrified look on his face. His other hand gives way, and the Joker plummets to his death.
It's weird, because as a kid, I actually kind of felt sad. I was like, dang. But yeah, he plummets to his death. Batman and Vicky are still hanging there, and they try to get up, but they are hanging from an old structure, so it falls apart, and they start to plummet right behind Joker. Batman, thank God, has another grappling hook, shoots it up to the top of the cathedral, grabs Vicky, and they swing there.
And breaks Gwen Stacy's neck.
Yeah, basically. If only he'd been a second sooner there. They just hang there, and the police, having shown up, are using all these spotlights on it, and it kind of illuminates them there swinging back and forth. And then we have a nice little cutaway to the Joker inside the cement, the pavement, having his body broken through, and inside he has a laugh box that is going off.
Because being the Joker has to go out with a laugh.
Yep.
And sure enough, he does. He managed to trigger it before he fell to his death. As they look over the body, the commissioner sees the laughing box, pulls it out, and that's just how we end things with the Joker, with him having, quote-unquote, the last laugh.
Yeah, the last laugh. There's this weird little bit later where they think they see Batman and Vicky coming down in the comic book. They find Alexander Knox covered with the bat cape. It's this really weird thing that's in the comic book.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I didn't understand it either. I'd have to read it again. But basically, the police have realized that Batman is there to stop crime. We cut to the last scene of the movie, basically, where the police and the city and the press are all at a junket at night, of course. They are sitting there telling the people, or reading a letter that Batman wrote to them.
Letting them know that should evil ever rise up again, that they just have to call him. How do they do that? Well, they've been given a little gift from Batman to be able to do that. And we see the bat signal in full display. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to end it with that. Though we do get, the official ending is two-part, where we see Vicky being picked up by Alfred to go back to the manor, with her being informed that Master Bruce might be a little late. And she says, of course, it makes perfect sense why. But there's kind of a resignation to that, which I've always interpreted as a way of her saying, like, this relationship is probably not going to work.
Right.
Because she does not sound very happy about it. It's like she's realizing that this other life for Bruce is so important. We do see Bruce up on the rooftops, the bat signal in the sky, and just Batman standing there looking over the city. It's a great shot.
Yeah, probably one of the most iconic shots in all of superhero cinema. I know I've certainly had it as a wallpaper on my computer many a time.
Well, it is fantastic. It's a great way for it to end, especially with, again, Danny Elfman's score blasting in the background.
Transition to Prince Scandalous, which is a very sexual song.
Oh, wait, whoa. Prince wrote sexual songs?
I mean, one or two.
Well, I'd never have guessed. How odd.
That's why my grandma loves him. No, just rest in peace, Prince. It's a very, very great song. If anyone's never listened to Scandalous, go check it out.
And so that leaves us with having covered the film here. Obviously, we've both shared our great love for it. But what would you say, with all the different forms of Batman in film, we'll skew the animated forms, stick at the live action. What is it about this movie that you would point out to people saying, this is why I feel this is the best version of, or this is the best Batman film? What about it does that for you?
Right. So if I have to look at it not from a nostalgic point of view, which I think most people will recognize that's why they like it, it just hits all the highs of what would Gotham City look like. Let's just really quickly talk about all the other Batman movies. Okay, Batman Forever didn't do it for me. Kinda close. Batman and Robin, no way. Batman Begins, the Nolan trilogy, that's Chicago. That's not Gotham City. Does this look like Gotham City? Yes. What is it, the greatest looking bat gadgets and, bat car, whatever? Yes. Is it my favorite Batman suit? Yeah. I'd have to say still, again, all black. The symbol's there to draw attention for fire. It's protected by Kevlar. That's why it's there. I love the suit. I know he can't turn his head. Whoa, big deal. Everything about it, the depiction of the Joker, the finale, the gothic undertones, the way Gotham City looks, just everything about it. Keaton, for whatever reason, just his performance, the way he did the voice and everything, just felt right. Just feels like Batman. Those eyes of his with his eyebrows, there's just something striking in there that it's like, that's the guy. That's why I like it. That's why I think it is the definitive Batman. And apparently I read an article the other day saying Twitter feels the same way. So I don't know about Twitter. I'm not on it, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people who love this movie. They have valid reasons to. What about you, Webb?
I mean, one of the huge things for me is Danny Elfman's score. That music, start to finish, sets so much of the atmosphere and tone for it that makes this stand out so strongly. And then loving Michael Keaton as an actor like I do also really hits home for this particularly, because I will say, if anybody gives him a run for the money in portraying Bruce Wayne, I actually think it's Val Kilmer. Kilmer's Bruce Wayne was very good. Batman, not so much, but I think his Bruce Wayne was very strong. I do think that Keaton finds that right measure of being aloof, but sophisticated and grounded enough in a way that Nolan's, or I shouldn't say Nolan's, I should say, because I don't know how much of it is Nolan doing and how much is of it is Bale. But I do know that Christian Bale's Batman seems just kind of, I don't know, a bit too arrogant, I think.
Yeah.
I don't see that in Keaton, because when I picture Batman, I maybe this is part of the whole like Adam West thing and everything, but I picture Batman as being this very rich man who has a great love of people in general, because he values life in terms of how precious it is, and knows that he's not any better than another person just because he's wealthier than they are. I think that was a value that his father tried to instill into him and that Bruce carries with him too. And that is Keaton's Batman, the one who tries to put on the airs but doesn't feel comfortable with it. When he's trying to relate to somebody, just wants to relate person to person. That's why he gave Knox a grant. It's like offhandedly, and Alfred, give Knox a grant, which takes Knox by surprise. When I picture all those things put together, it really does lead me back to Keaton as being the definitive live-action performer. I mean, Kevin Conroy will always be the definitive Batman for me, but Keaton as a live-action Batman just nails everything that I want him to do. Plus, as I said before, I don't like it when Batman is not portrayed as a detective. And maybe this is because of growing up as like I was very book smart, more so than a lot of my peers when it came to trivial and academic knowledge. Not saying that I was like smarter than them in general, but just when it came to like information that I had at my hand, I was easily able to recall things. So I always bonded with smart characters. And that's one of the things I loved about Batman, was how smart he was. Also, one of the reasons why Ra's al Ghul is my favorite villain for Batman, because what does Ra's call Batman?
Detective.
He always calls him detective. I respect the fact that he looks at him as an intellectual equal and looks at him as an intellectual in general. And that's how I've always seen Batman, somebody who has to try to know his weaknesses and outsmart people the way that he can. And this Batman is very resourceful in that element. Like whether it was like preparing that steel plate to guard him, or trying to figure out where those chemicals came from, or putting together everything about Napier's past. He's a very smart Bruce Wayne, but he's always also capable of handling himself in a fight, as long as he hasn't had a pre-existing injury from a plane crash. So he's got that right combination. Bale's Batman never struck me as genius intellect. I never at one point in time looked at that version of Bruce Wayne and said, that man has a genius level intellect. Keaton's is the closest to that. That's one of the reasons why I just like that performance so much better, and also why I think it all comes together in this wonderful dichotomy between him and Joker, to where I respect this movie so much more, not just for the aesthetic, but in terms of the characterization. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We love a good story, but we fall in love with characters. And these are the characters that made me want to fall in love with them for who they are and what they portrayed, as opposed to any other live-action version of Batman.
Yeah, I agree. There's one last thing I will say, just to add on to that. With the detective work, we actually don't see him doing it. I always felt like this was a great thing of the 80s. I'll give another example. The Ghostbusters have proton packs. It never shows them creating the proton packs. They just show up with it. Batman just figured it out. You don't show that part, which is, I think, a problem in today's movies. They always try to show that. And there's nothing interesting about that. Just say they did it, That's, I don't know, maybe it was one of the strengths of the 80s, but I always appreciate it when you didn't get the explanation. It's just there. That's one of the things I get away with.
That's also something that ties back into horror movies, too, because the more effective horror movies don't explain the horror, like Romero's Dawn of the Dead.
Exactly.
We don't understand where the zombies came from. We just understand that they exist, and people are trying to cope with it, but it's that unknown that keeps it more frightening.
Yeah.
So it's not, the more you try to explain it, the worse it gets. Somebody once told me that, like, that's the problem with, like, if you have to explain a joke, it's like dissecting it. And unfortunately, the more you dissect something, the quicker you kill it.
Correct. I appreciate that about movies of the 80s. I appreciate that about this movie. I hope everyone found this interesting, because I certainly had a great time talking about it.
I had a great time talking about it, too. It's always great to share my love of this movie. And we should also say, too, I know we did a lot of complaining about other versions of Batman live action. And if you like those movies, there is nothing wrong with that. And nobody here would be trying to take away your love and enjoyment of something. That's wrong for anybody to try to do that. If you love something, you genuinely enjoy a movie, a book, a TV show, whatever it is, if you love it, like, because of, like, what it inspires in you, what it stokes in you, nobody should ever try to take that away from you. And neither of us are trying to do that when we talk about how we prefer this version to the other. But there are specific reasons, like, why we do enjoy it and why we don't like the others. But that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy something or love it for what it is either.
Just love what you love. It's always the same thing that I hear, when somebody likes something so obscure. Something is always someone's favorite thing, no matter how obscure or how bad or how weird it is. And I'm cool with that. Just like what you like. That makes you you. And that's all you have to be, is you. So just do it.
Well, Stefan, thank you very much for being a part of this here as we have wrapped up the inaugural episode.
I was happy to be here. This was a lot of fun.
It was. And to all of you listening, for the time being, when we upload things, there's going to be basically an upload schedule for how we're going to do things to start, where we're going to simulcast, well, not simulcast, but simul-upload, where we're going to create an individual channel for this on YouTube and also on some podcasting networks. So it'll be up on there at a later date, and then eventually we're just going to segue to putting all these episodes onto its respective channel.
Right, and just like anything, the show will evolve. It's our first time here. Obviously I got a good co-host here, so expect more evolution as we go on. It's the first episode. Well, we promise to bring you more as much as we can.
But for the time being, if you want to leave any comments, you can email thecriticalandroid@gmail.com. Obviously, the YouTube section here, if you want to leave some comments, is more than welcome. And we'll be back with another topic. So leave your thoughts, comments, suggestions for future discussions. And Stefan, thank you again.
I'm Batman.
You are indeed Batman. I am Webb. All things must come to an end. So for now, the crypt is closed.